I am Nick Brewer. I'm the interim director at the League of Canadian Poets, and you are at Cross-Pollinations, the Canadian Association for Health Humanities Virtual Rounds series. This is actually our last event of the year and potentially the last event of the series, although we're chatting about possibly extending it because people do love it, including us. It's so neat to see these two disciplines come together. The series is sponsored by us, the League of Canadian Poets, as well as the Canadian Association for Health Humanities and the Health Arts Research Centre. We are so very grateful tonight for Jaadee and Lisa Striegler, who agreed at the last minute, like 24, maybe not even 24 hours ago, to join us this evening. So they are absolute heroes. And I will not speak too long before I let them get going. I do want to just share the League of Canadian Poets land acknowledgement. The League of Canadian Poets is located in Toronto, and Toronto is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas of New Credit. The treaty that was assigned for that particular set of lands is collectively referred to as the Toronto Purchase, and applies to lands east of Brown's Line to Woodbridge and north towards Newmarket. The League of Canadian Poets recognizes the enduring presence of Indigenous people on this land, and that art, poetry, and poetic practice related to the work of our organization takes place in traditional territories of many different nations. This has become perhaps rote in Zoom gatherings to have people share their land acknowledgements in the chat, although I do believe there still is an importance. Maybe every time there's somebody who learns something new. I personally am tuning in from Kitchener, which is located on the Haldimand Track. And I learned recently that less than 5% of the land in the Haldimand Tract that was originally granted to the Six Nations is now still in possession of the Six Nations. And so the Land Back organization here in Waterloo Region is doing like archiving and research work to determine which parcels of land were purchased with a treaty or a purchase agreement, and which should still belong to the Six Nations. I encourage you to do a little bit of research. I got married on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation by accident. We booked the date before the date was declared that date. And so at our wedding, we had on our programs and menus little bits and pieces of information relating to where we are located, as well as I learned that I married a woman, and gay marriage has been legal in Canada since 2005, but it was only in 2018, I believe, that the law was changed to legally recognize Indigenous ceremonies performed by Indigenous, I have forgotten the word, but essentially it's officiants as legal marriages. So I learned a whole lot, and I encourage you to do a little bit of research when you can. Without further ado, I am going to read, and then you don't have to hear from me anymore, but I'm going to introduce Lisa and Jaadee, and I'm going to start with Lisa, who is joining us from the Health Arts Research Centre. Actually, I'm going to spotlight these two as well so that you can see them. Spotlight, there we go. So Lisa Striegler is a research manager at the Health Arts Research Centre in the Northern Medical Program at the University of Northern British Columbia. The bulk of her career has been in addictions and mental health as both a community educator and counselor in her hometown of Vanderhoof in the unceded and occupied territories of Sgsmåþkvð. Lisa is an amateur performing artist, playwright, and poet, although she has actually been paid on scant occasions to write and direct plays. She is also a singer and songwriter and has quite a loyal following comprised of people who share her DNA. Lisa is a trained forum theater facilitator and, for her master's thesis, used that method to explore the effects of anti-Indigenous racism on community health in Sksz's territories. She is a firm believer in the power of stories to reach into the hearts of listeners and move them into action for change. And so she is a perfect person to introduce or to speak a little bit about the Health Arts Research Center. Sorry, I've somehow lost the website that there we go. And I will also read Kang Jaadee's bio here, and then you don't have to listen to me talk anymore. Kang Jaadee is a professional storyteller, educator, and published author belonging to the Haida, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations. Her Haida name, Kang Jaadee, means moon woman, and was presented to her at her great uncle's memorial feast by her cousin, Crystal Robinson. Over the past 30 years this year, which is amazing, congratulations on 30 years of storytelling, Kang Jaadee has performed traditional Haida legends while also sharing vivid personal stories about her clan's survival of the smallpox epidemic and the history and culture of her people. She has performed at hundreds of festivals, schools, and Aboriginal celebrations across Canada. She is the author of the popular children's books Raven's Feast and Gifts from Raven, selected as a local BC book to read, as well as curriculum textbooks, Haida Nation, Indigenous Communities in Canada, and We Are Home. Her stories have also been published in several anthologies, magazines, and online publications. Most recently, Kang Jaadee worked as the Vancouver Public Library's Indigenous Storyteller in Residence. While living in Haida Nation, she taught Jaadee, I forgot already. Hadkil, that was it. The Haida language, I apologize, she is going to tell you more. The Haida language while working with the Old Messett Village Council at Chief Matthews School and the Haida Health Center. Kang Jaadee holds a Bachelor of Arts with a major in English and a minor in Women's Studies from the University of Victoria and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Alberta. Thank you so much again to both of you. I'm so excited to hear this evening's presentation, so I will pass it off to Lisa.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, short notice, so I'm a little nervous, and I'm probably going to talk quite swiftly, so hopefully I will remember to enunciate. I'm here to talk a little bit about the Health Arts Research Center and the Northern Medical Program at UNBC. It is in Prince George, which is on the traditional territory of the xʷməthkվəy, who are part of the Haida Nation. xʷməthkվəy means confluence, and Prince George is where the Chaco River, which runs through Vanderhoof, town where I live, runs into the Fraser River. And Sďakľ is the nation that the xʷməthkվəy belong to and are a part of. And in English, you will hear it called the Carrier Nation. And it's not a direct translation, and I won't tell you more about that, but just so you know, that's the same people. So we call the Health Arts Research Center HARC, because that's the acronym. So I might switch back and forth. It's been around since about 2013, 2014. And I remember that date because I was just finishing my master's degree with Sarah then. And I attended the inaugural meeting of the HARC Advisory Committee. So what the Health Arts Research Center is committed to is new, outside the box, creative research that recognizes health, healing, and renewing well-being as an integrated endeavor, equally involving science and art. So for the first maybe about 8 to 10 years of existence, HARC was concerned with health inequities experienced primarily in northern, rural, and Indigenous communities in BC, but we've since broadened to include national and international geographies. Our goals at HARC are to advance new strategies anchored in creative arts and social determinants of health that produce innovative ways of addressing health inequities, to develop these new strategies based on the strengths and resiliencies of Northern and Indigenous communities, and to use creative arts to increase interest in, sustain, and support multidisciplinary and cross-community collaborations for addressing health and well-being issues. So hence our support involvement with Cross-Pollinations. So currently we have 3 main projects, main grants that we're working on under. So the first is a joint CIHR and Skszwx funded project called Cultural Agility in Northern BC's Healthcare System. And the purpose of this is to, 1, support especially Indigenous people from northern and rural places to join and stay in healthcare employment professions, and 2, to ensure the healthcare system is safer for all Indigenous peoples, including employees. And so we have tons of work we've done on this, but I'm going to just briefly talk about 5 projects. One is Indigenous Voices, Stories, and Healthcare workshops. So this is where we invite Indigenous storytellers, Indigenous artists, and co-facilitate workshops for healthcare practitioners to help them engage, with the heart of this work in a and to be more humane in their healthcare provision. We have narrative medicine workshops. We have provided support for training for 3 medical students to get narrative medicine facilitation training, and they have gone on. They're fully fledged physicians now and are themselves facilitating narrative medicine workshops with their peers and with medical students. We have Indigenous Youth Summer Science Camps, which are camps where we have, depending on where we are in the whole COVID world, have done virtual workshops in Indigenous communities in Northern BC, or have brought, invited Indigenous youth to come to UNBC for camps that, that promote and will inspire Indigenous youth to consider careers in health and science. Our idea there is that if we have more Indigenous youth and Indigenous people getting into the healthcare system as professionals, that it will become more culturally agile as a system. We also have the First Nations Community Education Program, where we invite medical students to go into a community, an Indigenous community in Northern BC for 2 to 6 days for an immersive experience, living in the community, being part of the community, chopping wood, whatever is needed. And that's wildly popular, that one. And one other little project that we have just rolled out this year is called the Because You Care box. And it's a subscription for a box that healthcare providers, administrators, educators, learners can sign up for in BC, so far just BC, and in the box, they will get in the mail, will be all sorts of learning exercises, QR codes to videos, and so stuff for the mind, for the brain, but also for the heart, and with actual things to work on with their hands, crafts, and other little goodies. I don't want to give too much away for anyone who might want to subscribe to one. And that has been fantastically popular. So those little projects come out of that first grant. The second grant is CIHR funded Catalyzing Heal Medicine, HEAL being an acronym for Humanities, Education, and Anti-Colonial Learning in Medicine. And the goal of which is to gather published instances of arts and humanities mobilization in the education and professionalization of healthcare practitioners, and look for evidence and gaps in the literature surrounding effective health humanities pedagogies with special attention to criticality and decoloniality. So the aim of this research, which we're currently in the middle of, is to share our findings with key knowledge users, such as the College of Family Physicians of Canada, the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada, and more, in order to fill in order to help fill those gaps in medical and healthcare education in Canada and beyond. And our third is a major award that we just got from Indigenous Services Canada through the National Collaborating Centre for Indigenous Health, and it's called HEAL Healthcare. hearts-based education and anti-colonial learning. And yes, there's a theme. And that just started this summer. So we currently have a call out, so pay attention. If I put you to sleep, wake up now. We currently have a call out for artists, academics, and clinicians, anyone who has ideas about what you think would be good for teaching healthcare students and or professionals how to become conscious of their biases that land on them via colonialism, LGBTQ2S plus phobias, placism, fat phobia, ableism, and more, and that utilize an arts-based method for engagement, for teaching. If you have or know anyone that has ideas like that, we would love to hear from you. We have, I wouldn't say grants, but opportunities for up to $10,000 per idea for someone to develop a teaching tool like this. So there's more on that on our website, or you can email me. That's our latest project. So it is through the first project, although like I said, none of these are discrete, they're all connected, that I have become acquainted with Jaadee. We met in person at the RCCBC Rural Health Conference in Penticton last May, where Jaadee, Darian Goldenstall, who is a postdoc with us, and Sarah co-facilitated a 2-hour workshop for rural docs. Jaadee had the full attention of the docs at this workshop, had them laughing and yes, had them crying, and had them fully feeling and engaging in the heart work of medicine. Jaadee will tell you a story or 2 or 3 if I haven't talked too long. And through her storytelling, we will be invited, if we allow ourselves to be open to that invitation, to grapple with, to think about pressing issues of anti-Indigenous racism in healthcare. We will be invited to grapple with, to think about complexity in health research, and that despite a health system that has, in my opinion, grossly underserved and harmed in many ways Indigenous peoples, this invitation will be offered to us with an abundance of grace and love from Jaadee. So over to you.
How Chankon Mantomi, these are 2 ways I say thank you in 2 of my languages. I'm very honored by your words, and I appreciate them, and I appreciate you. And I want to start by telling a legend, and it's the beginning of a legend anyways, and it starts so long ago that I'm going to stretch out this phrase for a while because it starts before time and before our universe, when there was nothing, when there was no one except for darkness. Awash, a long time ago, before our universe, before our world, when there was nothing and no one except for darkness, there was one supernatural being flying in this darkness forever and ever and ever. He has 3 names. One is Yosh, another is Hoya, and still he is also known as Ninkishlas, he whose voice must be obeyed. Raven, our trickster, our creator, was flying in the darkness for eons of ages, looking for a place to land. But he never found it, no matter the direction he took. And the darkness was thick, it was heavy. Yes, but somehow it slipped under his wings, his feathers, his skin. It surrounded his cloak, it weighed on his mind. It got into every part of his hlu, his body. And at first it just moved him around this way and that, this way and that, but then it started pulling him apart in every direction. It would destroy him, but he is the Yash, the raven. And Onsidankang, he knows who he is. So he flapped his wings hard and fast and harder and faster, and the darkness came out of him and around him until it made a great ball. Our world, so beautiful. It took his breath away as he went, honey squaw. That is so beautiful. I must change myself into a very handsome two-legged, into a human, into a man. In my new body, I'll go into this world. I'll fix it. I'll make it even better than it is. It's almost perfect. I'll fix all those things and more, he promised. I'll make this world even better. Onge anga. Dear people, that's what you are listening to my story. You are onge anga, you are dear people. I could sit here all night tonight and all day tomorrow and every day and every night telling you raven story after raven story after raven story until I grow to be 150 years old. A very long time from now, because I'm still so young. Even the youngest of you will grow old with me. Yes, you will. But I will not get to tell all the raven stories that exist. This is just one. Usually I would sing a couple of raven songs at this point using my drum, but I know it will eat up the storytelling portion, and I will use my drum, I think, at the end. And so I have it right here beside me, as you can see in the screen, and I will sing at the very end. So, Kong Jaadee Hinu Hadgif Kadi Kyang. My Haida name is Moon Woman. Both parts of my name are used at once, as together it means Moon Woman. Because it was given to me at the memorial feast honoring my great uncle, who was hereditary chief of my clan. My name is legal according to our traditional law. I just haven't been brave enough to change it according to Western law. Maybe I'm not grown up enough yet. So maybe that will come in the future. But I do use my name every day because in my research, I learned that it used to be illegal for Indigenous people to have a traditional name. So when I meet other Indigenous people who have a traditional name, I strongly encourage them to use it as often as they possibly can because of this very reason. Because likely they were given their name, even if it's just a dinner with their own family, then it's legal according to our traditional law. And just so you know, both of my parents do not have traditional names at all because their parents attended residential schools. And at that time, it wasn't okay to be a Haida. In fact, when I was growing up, nobody had a traditional name. And it wasn't okay for us to sing our songs or dance our dances or wear regalia or speak our language. And I'm grateful that I had a very good foundation because my paternal nani or grandmother and grandfather lived just up the street from where we lived in Sgsmåx in Newmasset on the northern end of Haida Nation. And when my grandfather or Chinny was out fishing, which was pretty much every day, I would just go to their house and my nani secretly taught my little sister and I our alphabet and how to count. And when I was about 3 years old, Chinny got home and he reprimanded her in our language and told her she wasn't allowed to do that. And that's because he attended a residential school in Sardis here in BC called Kokalitsa Residential School. So regardless of whether or not she stopped teaching me and my sister, she still spoke our language every day. And I still visited her every day until I was 7 when she passed on into the next world. Our language is a linguistic isolate It's not related to any language in the world. And that's because before contact with European settlers, there were 30,000 Haidas living on Haida Nation all over Haida Nation. That's where we originated. Now, there are 4,000 Haidas in the entire world. And we are really spread around the entire, there's one family in Greece. I hope I get to visit them one day. But, and there's a family living in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories. And, but originally everyone's ancestors started on Haida Nation. So even today, if you want to journey to Haida Nation, say you want to take your vehicle, you will go to Prince Rupert and you will take an 8-hour ferry one way to get to Haida Nation. So it is a very isolated place. The ancestors traveled by canoe. And that's why our language isn't related to any language in the world. I am mentoring my youngest child in our language for the 3rd year. And after just 4 sessions in the first year, we were speaking fluently. It made us laugh and laugh and laugh. So yes, I have one family member I can speak with in our language. And I gotta tell you, it makes my heart so happy every single day. Anyway, I want to tell you some stories. So I have written some books. So I also wrote a couple of primary textbooks. One is Haida Nation, and it's a compare and contrast. Haida children in the ancestors' time, Haida children today. And about a month or so ago, I was on Haida Nation, and I really enjoyed visiting my village of Sgsmåłklig of Old Masset. And I also enjoyed visiting the southern village of Sgsmåłklig. And I got to tell the Haida students that I brag about them wherever I go in the world, because the Haida children today speak our language. They dance, they sing our songs, they drum, they wear regalia, they weave their own hats or they weave their own baskets. They're amazing. And it makes me just, I don't know, filled with so much pride that Haida children today are very similar to Haida children in the ancestors' time. So the other one that, primary textbook that I wrote, 2 different publishing houses asked me to write these. The second one asked me to write about Haida Nation. So Haida Nation, we are home. I wrote that, and I really spoke about how Haida Nation is a magical place, not just for Haida, but for anyone and everyone. And fairly recently, I was a consultant for this Owl Kids 4 Canoes issue, the Haida of Haida Nation. It was launched on June 21st. And I managed to convince one of my former students to be interviewed for this issue. I had to contact my cousin and beg her, please let my nephew be part of this issue. And thank goodness he was. So in 2016, a publisher called me up and said, Jaadee, I want to take one of your stories and make it into a book. I didn't believe him. I thought he was a bozo and I was going to hang up on him. Thank goodness I stayed on the call, and I sent 4 stories to him and the editor, and they chose Raven's Feast, Yaxlaganut. I don't read from my book. Sometimes I do, but that's extremely rare. I was taught by my great aunt that that's not the way I tell stories. That's not the way it's meant to be. And I was taught by my uncle a different way as well, my mom's younger brother. And so what I learned from telling stories is that the stories have their own spirits. So it's not up to me and what I want to share. It's what you need to hear. I don't know what you need, but the stories know. So whatever I'm sharing with you today, it's because they know what you need. It hasn't been something that I decided. They know already. So that whatever I'm sharing with you, it's determined by you, believe it or not. So after Yosh created our world, and he put the land where it needed to be, and then he put the fresh water around the world so that there would be water for all. And then he took everything that swims and he put them into the waters and watched as they swam and swam. And then he took all of the bugs and he put them on the earth and watched as some crawled up high and some crawled down low. And then he made all of the four-leggeds, everything that walks on four legs. He put them on the earth and he stood back and watched as they moved around the entire world where they wanted to be. And then he made all of the flyers, the winged ones. He put them into the air and they flew around him, and it made him so happy. And then he made all of the nations of two-leggeds in all the colors that we live in today, and put everyone on the earth in one place because he wanted everyone to live together. But those humans, they unsidangen, they thought they knew better, and they divided themselves into the four main nations, and they moved to the four directions on their own. Yosh, Raven said, "Hu laga, it's all right." He went into their settlements, their towns, their villages, taught them how to be anga anga, how to be dear people, how to build their shelters, how to gather their food and prepare it, how to sing their songs, dance their dances, how to tell their stories, how to look after the very old and the very young. And when he was done with the rest of the world, he flew to Haida Nation, the land of the people, where he taught those 30,000 Haida ancestors the same things. And when he was done, he said, "Ah, Rianu, finally, ayadu akala uslang. I'm really exhausted today." So he moved to a place where he built his own na'i ones, his own big house made of cedar. He gathered some cheen, some fish, and he prepared it. He found fresh ankh, water, and he drank it. He thought he'd rest for a very long time, but Ganu, no, it wasn't meant to be. The next day, he went into the forest, gathered more materials, and he built another na'i ones. He put it beside his house, and then he built another, and another, and another. And he stopped and said, "I wonder why I'm building so many houses when I'm the only one here. Aya, I don't know." So he built and built and built for 50 years when he said, "Hudi gigan, I'm finished." And he went all the way back to his house where he ate the cheen and he drank the ankh. And he asked himself a question. What am I feeling inside? I'm lonely. I'm lonely for the company of other two-leggeds, of other humans. I don't know what to do about it. Oh, I know. I'll have a laganat. I'll have a feast. I'll invite everyone to my feast. And he stood to invite his guests when he said, yeah, what am I doing? I only have enough food for myself. So he set his fishing net. He got out his clam baskets and his seaweed baskets and his berry baskets and his hunting spear, and he hunted and he fished and he gathered food as days and weeks and months and even years passed. But each day that he gathered food, he would clean it all and prepare it. Some of it he would lay in the sun or hang in the wind until it was dry, and he put it away. And for other food, after he cleaned it and prepared it, he hung it up and he lit a fire under it until it was ready, and then he put it away. And he was so excited, he said, laganat kaske, yeah, what am I doing? I don't have any gifts for my guests. So he took his tools and he went into the world. He gathered cedar bark and made dadange, hats. He made kigwe, baskets. He made sleeping mats and capes and skirts. He made drums and drumsticks. He carved paddles, canoes, totem poles. He made regalia. He made those beautiful copper shields. He made jewelry, and it took days, it took weeks, it took months, it took years of making gifts. But when he was making that final gift, he smiled and he nodded and said, laganat xʷməthkվəy arawang, yes, it is time for the feast. And he stood and he faced the eastern direction. and he stomped his foot and he counted 4 times. Swanson, Stun, Shonish, Stanson. And he looked to the eastern horizon and he saw coming from this direction all the red-skinned peoples of our world, all the indigenous speaking peoples of our world, speaking their languages, wearing their traditional clothing, traveling in their canoes. And he welcomed them to the territory. Dalankusia, you are all welcome here. Dalankenge ash ande hangelga. It's good to see you all. Dalankatsketla uslan. You all look really good. Hashwishistalu wagen kawangosla. Y'all come over here and then sit down. And then he turned to the south and he stomped his foot and he counted 4 times. Swanson, Stun, Shomish, Stanson. And he looked to the southern horizon and he saw coming from this direction all the yellow-skinned peoples of our world, all the Asian-speaking peoples of our world, speaking their languages, wearing their traditional clothing, traveling in their canoes, and he welcomed them to the territory. Dalanklusia tuga, Dalankenge ash ande hangelga, Dalankatsketla aslan, Hashkwishistalu wagen kawangosla. And then he turned to the west and he stomped his foot and he counted 4 times. Swanson, Stun, Shonish, Stanson. And he looked to the western horizon and he saw coming from this direction all the black-skinned peoples of our world, all the African-speaking peoples of our world, speaking their languages, wearing their traditional clothing, traveling in their canoes, and he welcomed them to the territory. Dalankusia tuga, Dalankenge ash ande hangelga, Dalankatsketla aslan, Hashkwishistalu wagen kawangosla. And then he turned to the north and he stomped his foot and he counted 4 times. Swanson, Stun, Shonish, Stanson. And he looked to the northern horizon and he saw coming from this direction all the white-skinned peoples of our world, all the European-speaking peoples of our world, speaking their languages, wearing their traditional clothing, traveling in their canoes, and he welcomed them to the territory. Dalankusia tuga, you are all welcome here. Dalankenge ash ande hangelga, it's good to see you all. Dalankatsketla aslan, you all look really good. Hashkwishistalu wagen kawangosla. Y'all come over here and then sit down. He introduced himself. And one by one, the groups of people introduced themselves. And they sang their songs. They danced their dances. They told their stories. And it truly was Laganak Xʷməthkվəy Arawang. It was time for the feast. And Yosh, Raven, brought out Tawe Kwan, a whole lot of food for the feast. And they feasted as days and nights and weeks and months and years upon years passed around them. They continued to feast together. And when it was Xʷməthkվəy Arawang, when it was time for them to leave, he gave each guest a gift or gifts and sent them back to the 4 directions from where they had come from. Anga anga. Dear people, we were all invited to Raven's Feast. You were invited the day you were born. Dalang Wadlawan, each and every one of you. You were born with a gift or gifts. You're meant to learn what your gifts are and practice them with your whole self so you can be a shining light to those around you who don't yet know what their gifts are. There is one more part of my story that I must share. I want you to remember, Dalang Wadlawan, each and every one of you, you have tens of thousands of ancestors who love you no matter what, who will always love you. They walk with you every day. I want you to remember them as I give you homework. It'll take the rest of your life to do it. Yan mo lang. It's easy. I want you to hug yourself every day and say, I love me. This is what I do each day before I get out of bed, and each day before I go to sleep. And since this pandemic started, I hug myself a lot during the day too. So I hope you can do your homework every day for as long as you live, because our world needs more love. This is how we put more love into the world. And besides, you're meant to love yourself. Your body that you are moving around in is your true home. You're meant to love what you look like, the size that you are. You're meant to love the age that you're at. You take that body with you everywhere you go. You're beautiful and perfect as you are. You always have been. You always will be. So once you've learned to love yourself, because it takes a long time to love oneself, and it's so worth it, I want you to teach everyone around you, your families, your friends, about their tens of thousands of ancestors who love them no matter what. I want you to teach them to hug themselves and tell themselves, I love me, for as long as they live. Because it's love that will change our world. It's very important. All right. I think I will be able to sing this song now. So I am here on my southern territory, so of the Squamish, Musqueam, Skszwx First Nation, and I'm here in Vancouver, and I moved here from Haida Nation 3 years ago. And last year I was apprenticing with my uncle Sgsmålpox, Bob Baker, to learn the Squamish stories. I don't have time to tell you a Squamish story, and my songs that I'm sharing with you are Haida as well. So I want to thank your tens of thousands of ancestors for bringing you here today, because your ancestors lived through famine, they lived through war, and they lived through disease so that you could be here. You are your ancestors' wildest dreams. And a lot of hardship and struggle happened to them. Maybe a lot of trauma, but there was a whole lot of love and strength and resiliency that was passed on too. That also lives in each of you. So this is a chant to connect the heart with the mind, with the body, with the spirit. It is the Raven Love chant for the clan that I belong to. But originally, this was a love chant to honor the Nanalang Isken Chinalang, the grandmothers and the grandfathers. I'm thanking your grandmothers and grandfathers for you. Eya, eya, la, aya, eya, la, 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 eya, eya, la, aya, eya, la. Eya, eya, la, aya, eya, la, 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 eya, eya, la, aya, eya, la. Eya, eya, la, aya, eya, la, eya, eya, la, aya, eya, lo. How you. I'm going to sip my tea. So I know that when people look at me and they hear me speak, or they hear the stories, or they hear me singing, they might think that I've always done this, that I've always been proud of who I am, that I've always been strong, that I've always loved myself. But I used to hate myself. I used to wish that I'd never been born. I even contemplated suicide at one time. But I felt that way because an armed forces school was built in my community, because an armed forces base moved there. And they built their own grocery store and recreation center and school. And the principal of the Haida school, and it was only Haida because Haida children attended that school. It wasn't Haida because of, and they didn't teach any of our culture or bring in any of our elders or anything like that, or, teach us our language or anything. It was, it had become too small. And so the principal of the Haida school went to the principal of the town school and asked if the Haida children could attend their school, because the Haida school had become far too small. And the principal agreed. So when I started kindergarten, xʷməthkվəy, a long time ago, but not quite as the beginning of the world, but a long time ago, I was in kindergarten, and there were Haida children in all the grades up to grade 7. But those settler students were given misinformation. They were told lies about us as Haida. And I remember being in that kindergarten classroom with my cousin. He was the only other Haida student in the class. And I remember us being at our centers. And I was at the drawing center, and there was somebody doing puzzles and somebody was doing blocks. My cousin was in the house, and we had to circulate through each station at some point. And I remember the kindergarten teacher left the classroom. And I remember looking at the teacher. She looked at me and she closed the door and left us alone. And I remember returning to my paper and my picture, and I continued to draw, but I had a feeling, and I looked up, and 17 students surrounded me in an angry circle. And all those stereotypes that still exist for Indigenous people everywhere came out of their 5-year-old mouths into my 5-year-old ears. I remember looking at my cousin and him looking at me, but we didn't say anything. And I thought to myself, there's so many of them, it must be true. Those children bullied me every day in groups of 2 or more. One day it was 100 against me. And every day until grade 7. So by the time I got to high school, I really hated myself and wished I'd never been born. I have a very scary mom, and she warned me that I was going to survive. I was going to graduate, and I would stay in this world. She's like 5'2", and she's really funny. But I stayed alive and I graduated. And I was given a button robe by my great-grandmother at my high school graduation ceremony. I'm just taking my robe out of my regalia bag to show you. My great-grandmother, Dinan Chaos, was 86 years old when she made this robe for me. And I brought this robe into my son's kindergarten class because he was one of 2 Indigenous kids at his school in Victoria when I was attending UVic. And the other student was in grade 7, he was in kindergarten. I knew I had to do something. I had to change my mindset. I had to stop being ashamed, and I had to stop wishing I'd never been born, because I knew I would pass that on to my kids. So I brought in this robe and explained about my great-grandmother, how it took her 6 months to make it when she was 86, how I'm her eldest great-grandchild because she has over 100 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and even my little sister and little brother do not have a robe made by her hands. So I'm very fortunate to be the eldest one, because she gave this to me at my high school graduation ceremony in front of my town. And this is the first story exactly what I shared with you, that I shared in my son's kindergarten class. It's about how the stars came to be. I don't have time to tell you that story. But when I was done, my son's peers looked at him and said, "You are so lucky." And my little boy sat up taller with the biggest smile on his face. And I remember thinking, because this happened 30 years ago in September, I remember thinking, that's why I have to do this. I have to do this for him. Now, it takes me a long time to learn something. I learn my lessons very hard. And I like to teach people some of my lessons with the hope that people will learn a little bit easier. But I remember about 20 years in of telling stories, I'm like, yes, storytelling helped my kids. Storytelling helped my kids. I was saying to myself one day, and I realized, wait a second, storytelling helped me. Storytelling healed me, because when my children were small, I faked that I was proud. I faked that I was strong. Well, they were small and I was tall, so that when they got to be tall and I had become small, they would be strong, they would be proud. Well, let me tell you something else. My eldest son and daughter-in-law gave birth to my first grandchild 9 months ago. And he sings her our songs every single day. These songs help her when she's having teething pain, or when she's having after effects from her vaccines, or when she's having a sleepless night. He will sing her our songs, and it's the only thing that suits her. And I'm just so grateful, because our people believe in reincarnation. We always have, even though the missionaries really try to stop us from believing that. We still believe in reincarnation. And Jaadee is the same great grandmother who made this robe for me. So what I did the last time I saw her in September was I held her and I thanked her for coming back to us. I thanked her for returning, and I spoke to her in our language. I'm truly grateful. I want to thank you all for listening, and I'm wondering if any of you have any questions.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for the intimacy and vulnerability that you bring to your storytelling, and for the joy that you bring